I know it's 9 a.m. where you are. It's 12 p.m. here. So why don't we get started?
Sounds great.
All
Thanks for
right.
having me.
Yeah. So what I usually like to do is I like to introduce myself, and then I'll let you introduce, and then we'll hop right in.
Sounds great.
So, all right, cool. So I'm Dr. Lauren. For those of you who don't know, I run Think Dyslexia, the account, and putting out great content for you all about dyslexia. I am a special educator. I am not an adult with dyslexia. I always want to put that information out there. But I love interviewing folks who are in the field, who are dyslexic, who are doing anything that can push the narrative along for people to have that awareness. So Liz, we connected, and I'm so grateful to hear about your book. So tell us a little bit about you before we hop in.
Sounds great. And I love your intro. I should caveat as well. So I'm Liz Trudeau. I am not dyslexic. I am the proud mother and wife of some amazing dyslexics. And I am not an expert like you are either. So to further caveat, I did not go to school for this. I am a parent, probably like many of your followers, who are just looking to help their child.
I love that. Thank you so much for actually setting the stage, because that gives me some context about the questions we're going to dive into. So before we dive into our questions, I want to let my audience know I've turned on my badges. So that is a way to support Think Dyslexia, the cause. Anything that you donate, I use towards creating content for you all. So just had to pop that on and let you know. All right. So Liz, can you tell us a little bit about what Brilliantly Dyslexic is? How did this book come to be? Give us a little bit of context.
Great. So Brilliantly Dyslexic is a children's book of short stories about incredible dyslexics, from scientists to engineers to artists, and the path in their life from struggling to school to ending up really thriving in the world. And to answer your second question, how did this start? It really started, as I mentioned earlier, as an attempt to help my daughter. She is dyslexic. And despite having amazingly supportive teachers, a fantastically dyslexic dad, she really struggled to feel smart. She looked around at her classmates at school, saw them reading and writing, and I think as she would describe it, she would say, like, that's like the big school things. And she saw those big school things happening, and that she just didn't feel like she could perform in the same way. And one of the things that really seemed to help, because just telling her, oh no, you're smart, does not really do the trick. But one of the things that did seem to help a bit was starting to tell her the stories of some other people in the world who had been just where she was, and were later in their life and thriving. And that's where it started. And so since she seemed interested, I looked for a book, and frankly was astonished that it didn't exist. There are great books out there. I don't want to pretend that there aren't, but there wasn't the book that I was looking for, which was telling the stories, not just that these people exist, but telling the stories from starting with childhood. What did they feel like as a child, and then carrying that arc through, and sort of landing where they are in their lives now.
Right. No, I think that's so important. I was actually talking to a colleague yesterday about representation in literature. And so I feel like oftentimes dyslexic kids, when they are, and I don't know when your daughter was diagnosed, but if they're not diagnosed at a young age and they don't know what's going on, more than likely they're not getting the interventions they need. So they're shying away from reading and writing, when really what we should do is embrace that and actually have representation in books for kids to read and want to read and see, oh, wow, this student thinks like I do, or this student does, the little quirks that I have, and it makes us feel valued. So I 100%. Love that you as a mom are like, nothing's out here for my child, so let's create it for my child and others. And I think that is amazing. That's beautiful.
Thank you. Well, I think you raise a really good point about the representation in literature, because it's not just for the kids who relate to that difference from the norm. It's for all kids. We all need to hear stories about all types of people, so that we can appreciate all types of people, and understand that there's no real norm. That's an illusion. But also it helps all kids embrace the differences that they have in themselves. They may not be dyslexic but everyone's got something. And so when you
Exactly.
hear
We all
about
learn
somebody,
differently.
yes, exactly,
No, I love
100%.
that. So I know that you researched a lot of different stories to create this amazing piece of literature. So what did you learn that could be most helpful for teachers and parents, or do you feel like teachers and parents can kind of be clumped together? I know that was kind of a weird question, but I find when I communicate, I'm like, well, this could be for both. But I know sometimes we do have to direct it more towards parents and teachers. But I'm curious.
I do think it's applicable to both. I'm not a teacher, so I'll leave it to teachers to decide whether it's applicable. But I started this project for my daughter, but what I didn't realize is it would change me in the process. I had
Right.
realized before I was done with this, I thought, oh, if I quit today, it would still worth all the work because of how it's changed how I parent, and how I think. That when I started this, I would say, and when we started, she was diagnosed very early. So
Okay.
around when in kindergarten, pre-kindergarten, we sort of knew what was happening. Um, and I will say I was anxious. I didn't want her to struggle. I wondered what her future would be like. Would she thrive? And I was initially, I was very laser focused on helping her learn to read. And I still am. I'm not saying that isn't, but I was really focused on that. And in hindsight, and from what I learned researching these stories, I really feel like I missed a few things. And I'll say this once because otherwise I'm going to have to footnote everything I say, that learning to read, to write, and write is absolutely critical and requires explicit systematic instruction and a whole lot of hard work. So like
Thanks for that plug.
that is
Yes.
huge, absolutely enormous.
Yeah.
So understanding that, and putting that in one category, the things that I missed really, sort of frame it. So, and the things that I learned from these stories. So one is to believe in her without contingency. Um,
Okay.
it's not, I believe in her when she learns to read and write, and that she'll succeed if she learns to read and write. It is that she will succeed. Every single person I researched and I spoke to had at least one adult, it could be a teacher, a coach, a parent, who unequivocally believed in them and saw them for who they are. They may have never learned to proficiently read in a way that made them comfortable, but they had that, and that was the critical factor. Um, and yeah, so that was key. I mean, it was really through every story. One quote from a software engineer I had interviewed. Her name's Maria. She grew up in Uganda, where the school system had no understanding of dyslexia and was really written off. It was brutal. But the thing that she said was that the biggest thing was from my mom and dad. They kept saying, what the school says doesn't matter. There are ways you're intelligent. There are ways you are smart. And that
Yes.
is what she just held on to.
I love
Um,
that. It seems like everyone is loving this conversation. Thank you so much for the hearts and the support. Liz, this is a really great conversation. Keep it
oh, good.
coming.
Awesome. Well, I'll just talk about how I failed and what I learned, and we'll all be great. So the second one was, I mentioned earlier that laser focus on learning to read. And I would say the other shift was really focusing to spotlighting and nurturing strengths.
Right.
That I think we all in this community know this now, that like I had to reframe it for myself and think about, what if somebody asked me to go do the thing that I'm worst at every day and focus on that solely, and like that's how I was measured of my progress? It would be awful.
Yeah.
um, and so really looking at it and making sure that we're definitely putting in the time to get that reading and writing proficient, but making space to focus and definitely putting most of the emphasis on the things where she's already naturally thriving.
Right.
Um, and that was certainly true with the stories as well. One of my favorite stories, and you guys are probably familiar with Vernon Francois. He's a hairstylist, actually a celebrity hairstylist. And his story is fascinating on so many levels. One, he's a really interesting, grew up in England from a Rastafarian background, really embracing sort of natural textured hair And he got into braiding when he was like 8 years old and just
Wow.
fell in love with it. And
That
from
was his calling, right?
this is calling from 8 years old, he just like threw himself into hair. Um, and then since I use that example, it's really, and this is probably more for parents than teachers, it's so easy, especially when you have a child that struggles, when you see somebody, when you see them gravitate towards something, to be like, "Oh, this is their thing. This is their thing. This is their thing." And the thing is, a lot of those things don't stick. Um,
Right,
it's
right.
just about like, we just all need at any time to have one place where we feel successful. And that might
Absolutely.
change over time. It may
Yes.
not stick.
Yes. So Liz, you were really hitting on some key points here. And like Omaz just donated a badge or two, and I love it. And this is why we have these conversations, to make an impact, to make a difference, and to share these stories. And those of you who are just joining in now, Liz is the author of Brilliantly Dyslexic. She's a mom of a dyslexic. She's not dyslexic, but this is personal, and this is important. And Liz, I want to ask you, what could be 3 takeaway points that you want people to kind of grab onto Brilliantly Dyslexic?
Yeah, that's such a great point. Is um, really to embrace, I think, dyslexia as a different way of thinking, that's not exclusively defined by its weaknesses. It's like any difference, its advantages and disadvantages. Um, and the path forward is not to conform a dyslexic brain to
Right.
the typical standard, but to really embrace that and find a new path, find a path that makes sense, for you. And I think that's really applicable to all children. Um, the struggle is part of the process, but it's not forever. So I'd say embracing dyslexia as a difference, leaning into strength. And I would also say to parents and teachers, to not be discouraged if children don't see dyslexia as a positive thing. Um, I don't think anyone I interviewed would have felt as a child that dyslexia is their sort of superpower, or that it's a positive, it was something they were super excited about. That
Right.
came a lot later.
Right.
Um, and so it's, if your kid or your student thinks it's a superpower, awesome,
Right.
great. But if they don't, it's okay. It's whatever it is for them right now.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. And I see Sabrina, who I interviewed before. She's a special ed lawyer. She said, "Lean into your strengths." And I know she has a dyslexic daughter, so I know that
Yeah.
that's meaningful for her to say that. You know, I have to say, Liz, how can a child view their dyslexia as a positive when society views it as a negative? You know,
Yeah.
like the stories that you've researched, you know, the celebrities we know that are dyslexic. I mean, the countless adults that I've interviewed, nobody's ever like, "You're dyslexic, awesome, yeah." Like, unless you're seeing someone who knows how to intervene, or someone who has been successful that says, "Here's how I did it, let me show you."
Hmm.
So I mean, I love how there's so much out there now for young kids, you know, books like this, and other young adult books and resources. So, I mean, just getting this conversation out there, I can't say it enough. It's so imperative. It's so imperative. So, who is Brilliantly Dyslexic aimed for? Is it for specifically kids? Is it for
Yep.
teachers? Tell us a little bit about that.
So it's designed as, so the initial person it's designed for is a dyslexic child between 8 and 12.
Okay,
Um,
perfect.
however, I would say it's for a dyslexic child, it really is a read aloud book,
Okay,
for parents and teachers, because it's not a decodable text for, it's not written as a decodable text to be read independently. And I think, but it's a read aloud book, which is great for 2 reasons. Sort of one, what we've heard from parents in our test group, as well as teachers, is that these stories start conversations and they normalize talking about feelings and what's actually happening, because in the stories they're talking about their feelings. Um, so it's definitely for dyslexic kids. It's for teachers. We've had teachers who have read some of the stories aloud to their classrooms and used it as a way to start conversation, because dyslexia, people are curious about it.
they are.
And if we don't, like any difference, if we don't talk about it, then people are left thinking that it's taboo. So it's for parents and teachers, and frankly, I personally think it's for all kids. They're
Right.
interesting stories. I like stories about people and things that aren't like me, and I think kids do too.
They do. They really do. And my dog agrees. I don't know if you guys can hear. My loud German Shepherd is loving this live. No, but honestly, I think I love that. And I think talking about this social emotional piece is huge. You know, I put out a post a while ago about how dyslexia impacts social skills and relationship building. It's not just reading and writing, right? So it's so important to talk about those feelings and emotions because self-esteem and self-confidence is huge. I
Yeah.
also want to thank Ruby for donating a badge. I just saw that. Thank you so much. This is awesome. So Liz, we are coming to the end of our interview, and I want to make sure that people know where to get this book. I know that we had talked about maybe putting out a link or something
Yes.
where people can purchase it. So let's talk about that.
Yes. Easiest way to find everything is to go to brilliantlydyslexic.com. I made a special page for your followers, brilliantlydyslexic.com/think. And so with that link, you can get 3 stories from the book sent to your email. And so that's the only place that's available right now. So brilliantlydyslexic/think.
Okay, so everyone who's listening now, who's live, and also if you're listening to this afterwards, I'm going to link this in my story. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have this video in my story for a swipe up, and you will be able to access that link. So that is awesome. This has just been such an amazing conversation, and I'm really excited to delve into this book as well. Because when I was on the website, I saw some of the pictures, and I'm like, this is just, it's so vibrant, it's so inviting. It makes reading attractive for kids who may be shying away from that. So I love this.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, I love that you had me on.
Yes. So Liz, thank you so much. And those of you who just joined in, I know Michelle, one of my friends, she just joined in. Watch this later. This is so worth it. It's worth 20 minutes. And this was an awesome, awesome conversation. So thank you everyone who donated badges. And Liz, thank you so much for your time. And we will definitely be in touch.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, definitely. Have a good morning.
Thanks. You too.